Welcome back to Lessons from the Bible. In today's episode, we're diving into a theme that challenges every one of us: patience and perseverance. In a world that demands instant results, the Bible reminds us that waiting on God's timing and enduring through trials is essential to growing our faith. And to see this truth in action, we'll look at three powerful examples: Job, Joseph, and the Israelites. Let's start with Job. Job's story is one of the most famous accounts of suffering and patience in the entire Bible. Job was a wealthy, upright man who loved God. But in a series of devastating events, he lost his wealth, his children, and his health. Yet even in the middle of his pain, Job refused to curse God. Job wrestled with questions, with grief, and with doubt, but he still clung to faith. James 5:11 reflects on Job's endurance, saying, "You have heard of Job's perseverance, and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." Job's life teaches us that perseverance in suffering is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about holding on to God when nothing makes sense, trusting that His compassion and mercy will carry us through. Next, let's consider Joseph. Joseph's story spans Genesis 37 to 50. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it looked like Joseph's dreams of greatness were shattered. But Joseph remained faithful, using his gifts wherever he was placed. Eventually, God raised him up to become second in command of Egypt. When famine struck, Joseph's position allowed him to save not only Egypt, but also his own family. Joseph's perseverance shows us that God's delays are not his denials. Even in prison, even in betrayal, Joseph kept trusting. And in the end, he could say to his brothers in Genesis 52:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Patience and perseverance turned a story of betrayal into a story of redemption. Finally, we turn to the Israelites. After God freed them from slavery in Egypt, they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness before entering the Promised Land. Why so long? Because God was teaching them to trust, to depend on Him daily. Exodus 16 tells us how He provided manna each morning, just enough for that day, teaching them patience and reliance on His provision. But the Israelites often struggled with impatience. They grumbled, doubted, and sometimes turned to idols. Their journey reminds us that perseverance requires faith, even when the road feels long. Hebrews 10:36 captures this truth. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. So what do Job, Joseph, and the Israelites teach us about patience and perseverance? Job shows us patience in suffering. Joseph shows us perseverance through betrayal and delay. The Israelites show us patience in waiting for God's promises. Together, they remind us that patience isn't passive, it's active trust. Perseverance isn't just enduring, it's moving forward in faith, even when the outcome isn't clear. And the New Testament reinforces this lesson. Romans 5:3-4 says, "We glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope." James 1:2-4 adds, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." In other words, patience and perseverance are not obstacles, they're tools God uses to shape us. Maybe today you're in a season of waiting. Maybe you're struggling through hardship, or you're wondering why God hasn't answered yet. The stories of Job, Joseph, and the Israelites remind us that God is at work in the waiting. His timing is perfect, His promises are sure, and His purposes never fail. Our role is to trust, to endure, and to keep walking in faith. Here's the lesson. Patience is not giving up, it's pressing on with trust in God. Perseverance is not just surviving, it's growing stronger in faith through the struggle. And when we hold on, we discover that God is faithful to provide, to restore, and to bring us into His promises. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Lessons from the Bible. If this encouraged you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, let me know which of these stories, Job, Joseph, or the Israelites, speaks most to you about patience and perseverance. See you next time.